This video will focus on projective techniques, one kind of qualitative or exploratory research method. The other two are depth interviews and focus groups. So projective technique is one where it's also known as a disguise technique. And the reason for that is that it's an unstructured, indirect form of questioning that tries to project the respondent's underlying motivations, beliefs, attitudes, or feelings regarding the issues of concern. So here the question is not posed directly, rather one interprets from the respondent's answers what they truly feel about something. And the reason for this is that often the respondent may not answer the question truthfully. This might be for various reasons. The issue might be sensitive, embarrassing, or they may not even be fully aware of how they feel about something. So in projective techniques, respondents indirectly project their own motivations, beliefs, attitudes, or feelings onto the situation. There are a couple of different kinds of projective techniques. We'll look at each one of these. Let's begin by looking at association techniques. A word association task is where a respondent is presented with a word and asked to identify the first word that comes to mind related to the word that is shown to them. What is assessed or measured then is how long it takes for a person to respond to the stimulus, and also what is a response offered. So take, for example, here a word association task where two women, fictitious women, Mrs. M and Mrs. C, responded to various stimulus flashcards. When shown the flashcard with the word wash day on it, Mrs. M responded every day. Mrs. C responded by ironing. With the next flashcard saying fresh, Mrs. M responded and sweet, while Mrs. C responded with clean. When shown the flashcard pure, Mrs. M indicated the word air, and Mrs. C thought of soiled. Scrub, don't, husband does. Clean, filth, this neighborhood. Dirt, bubbles, bath. Soap and water, family, squabbles. Children, towels, dirty. Wash. By reviewing these different associations to the stimulus keywords, one can learn a lot about how Mrs. M and Mrs. C feel about washing clothes. They clearly have very different attitudes towards washing. Mrs. M, one would imagine, doesn't enjoy the process of doing laundry. For her, it's a chore she would rather not do. Mrs. C, on the other hand, enjoys, or I don't know if she enjoys, but she clearly cares a lot about clothes being clean. And she's somebody who might go to great lengths to ensure the clothes are done well. This might be very useful for a company that makes detergent, like Procter & Gamble, that makes a very large number of detergent brands, like Tide and Cheer. Here's another example of what you could do for a word association task. You could examine a bunch of brands appearing on the screen one by one and write down the first word that comes to your mind. This would tell the companies behind those brands, what do you associate the brand to? For example, somebody might say to Starbucks, coffee. Somebody else might say latte. Somebody else might go on to describe the first phrase as being a caramel macchiato with 3 shots of espresso and 2 Splendas, or some long phrase like that. Somebody else might respond to the keyword Starbucks by saying expensive, or outrageously expensive, or snobbish. So these keywords are very telling about, or these responses are very telling about how somebody truly feels about Starbucks. If somebody's asked to describe a brand, they may not be as detailed, but when you give them a keyword and ask them the first word that comes to their mind, you normally get a fairly good assessment of how they feel about the particular brand of interest. You can try this for other brands as well, like these. Here's a little exercise to try out to truly experience how an association tasks work. Harvard's psychology department has constructed these IAT instruments. This stands for Implicit Attitude Test Assessments. So you can go in there and take a skin tone IAT or any other IAT. If you're curious, go on and try the other IATs like race IAT, age IAT, and so on. Now, it is important when you do the exercise to do this in a quiet place where you're not disturbed. The exercise takes about 10 to 15 minutes. And when you're done, it's going to give you an assessment of, based on the test and interpretation of how you truly feel about certain issues. In this case, social issues. So go ahead and take the test, at your own, when you have the time and, a quiet place to take the test. It is up to you, by the way, to share personally identifiable information in the survey. If you do, it would benefit the researchers, but you don't have to. Okay. There are a couple of other projective techniques like word association tasks. Another one is called the sentence completion technique, where we learn something about how somebody feels about, again, issue, a brand or a product by having them complete a sentence, like a person who gets coffee at Starbucks is ... Or a person who gets coffee at Joe Coffee is... So we're getting here a sense of the brand personality by gathering information about how people complete the sentence. Story completion is very similar, except it's not just a sentence, but it's an entire story. And then you've got other examples of the same thing, like a picture response or a cartoon test, where somebody is asked to complete a word bubble. Or a speech bubble, not a word bubble. Moving along, an expressive technique is one where respondents are presented with a verbal or visual situation and asked to relate the feelings and attitudes of other people to the situation. Two common methods of expressive techniques are role-playing and third-person technique. In role-playing, typically the respondent is asked to play the role of somebody else or mimic somebody else's behavior. This is commonly used when it is hard to get access to certain kinds of respondents. Now, research has shown that research going back almost to all the way back to the 70s has found that when a couple of students were asked to take on roles, the roles of prisoners and of prison guards. Prison guards were advised to give electric shocks to prisoners when they weren't behaving well enough. These are a bunch of students in a college, and it turns out that when people stepped into this role in the experiment of a prison guard, they literally they went from being friendly to becoming harsh and extremely harsh to a point where the experimenters had to stop the study because they're afraid the prison guards had taken their role too seriously and they were shocking the prisoners too much in the course of the experiment for misbehavior. So anyways, the point of this example is that when people step into a role, they actually play out the role pretty well. And so one way of learning about, let's say, the thoughts of a VP marketing would be to get the respondent to believe their VP marketing, give them a little bit of script, tell them about their profession, their job, the promotion they got from the VP marketing, a little bit of color about their office and their responsibilities. And as soon as you do that, people will step into the role, even though they've only been given a few minutes, to kind of think about it. They'll step into the role and play it out really well. And so role-playing studies involve getting the respondent to act like somebody they're not and respond accordingly. A third-person technique is a curious little technique used to get respondents to project, or talk about somebody else. Now, there are many questions that a respondent may be embarrassed to answer, or they might, not want to talk about. Common issues you can think about are personal issues, health issues, substance use issues, right? These are the kinds of issues people are typically reticent to speak about. And so rather than asking them the question directly, we ask them questions, in a third person kind of form. To give an example, if one wants to know about, well, how does certain respondent feel about returning clothes that they have used. So we make up a persona now. We tell the respondent that Mrs. Jane is a mom of two. She lives in Edgewater, New Jersey. And she's taken on a part-time job lately to make ends meet because the single, there's just not enough. They don't make enough. The husband doesn't make enough money to them live a good life. And so she's right now doing a part-time job while also taking care of her two kids. And she had to go to, she decided to stop by Macy's to pick up a dress for a party she had to go to. And she went to the party, and it was a good party. It was nice for her to get out with her husband, get some time with, away from the kids for one night. And they got back home, and when she got back home, she realized she had spilled some red wine on her dress, and it was just couldn't get the stain off. She didn't bother too much about it at that time because they were tired, they crashed. A couple of days passed, a week passed, and she had another party to go to, and she was going through her closet looking at all the dresses she had, and she came across the dress she bought from Macy's. And now she realized a couple of months had passed, and she looked at the dress, and she realized that the stain was not going to go. So she decided to head back to Macy's to return the dress. What do you think about Mrs. Jane? Do you think it's okay for her to return the dress, even though she knows she has dirtied, ruined the dress? And how do you feel about Mrs. Jane returning a dress that she has ruined and returning it well past, a reasonable period of time? Now, these are the kinds of questions I would ask somebody to learn about how they feel about abusing the return policy of a store. But rather than asking the respondent themselves, I am projecting this onto Mrs. Jane. And that's the third person technique for the expressive technique I alluded to earlier. Okay. Projective techniques then are really good in general at learning about issues that subjects are normally not willing to respond to or unable to give a response to. They're helpful in addressing issues that are personal or sensitive. One issue that commonly comes up is about environmentally friendly practices. When people are asked whether it is good to be environmentally friendly, almost everybody agrees, yes, it's good to be environmentally friendly and respectful to the environment and so on. However, when they're asked if they'd be willing to pay some money, a premium then, to save the environment, most people refuse to pay that premium, right? So we're seeing that play out in many cases where people are asked, well, okay, it's good, you're all for recycling, but would you pay more for grocery store bags, for example? And people typically say no. So, It's also really good at getting at issues that might operate at a subconscious level, where somebody doesn't really, where people are not even aware of things that might be affecting them. So Gavin Fitzsimon's got a bunch of research on the on psychological reactance, which is what people do. Is a subconscious reaction to response to that people have when they feel like their freedom is being threatened. So quickly to quote the little anecdote of Gavin Fitzsimon's here, many years ago when he was a graduate student, he realized that it was late in the evening, it was low in Coca-Cola. So he headed downstairs to get a bottle of Coca-Cola, and his neighborhood convenience store didn't have it. Being in New York City, figured he could walk another block and find Coca-Cola there. So he walked another block, and turns out that convenience store didn't have Coca-Cola either. So he was very surprised, of course. So he decided to walk another 3 blocks to the next convenience store. And to his utter dismay, even this store was out of Coca-Cola. This made him even more inclined to continue his search. And so he decided to walk another 4 blocks, and this time, fortunately, this convenience store had Coca-Cola. So instead of buying 1 bottle he would have normally bought, he bought 4 bottles and lugged 4 bottles of Coca-Cola back all the way back to his apartment. On analyzing his own behavior, he realized that he had responded because somehow he subconsciously felt like his freedom to choose was being taken away. And of course, there was never going to be a shortage of Coca-Cola in the world. But nevertheless, in the moment, his mind told him to stock up on more Coca-Cola than he normally needed, just because he felt like a sense of freedom was being taken away from him. So these are the kinds of things that projective techniques are very good at getting at. Learning about things that people will be reluctant to answer with direct questioning, either in a focus group setting or interview setting. Of course, projective techniques come with a number of downsides. They include the main issue, which is they're subject to the risk of interpretation bias. I mean, what we learn is in the eye of the interviewer, and they tend to be expensive, tend to take a lot of skilled interpreters to understand projective techniques, and tend to be expensive to carry out as well. Moving along, we'll now take a look at some observation methods for qualitative or exploratory research methods. Observation methods are characterized by, well, observation. Now, to better understand it, let's examine some ways of a taxonomy of observation methods. There are structured observation methods where the researcher has clearly defined what they're looking for. In unstructured observation, what is to be observed hasn't been clearly described. In disguised observation, the respondents are aware, they're unaware they're being observed. For example, cameras or recording devices that are tracking what people are doing without their knowledge. In undisguised observation, the respondents are aware that they're being watched. And then another way of categorizing observation methods is as natural or contrived. In a natural observation setting, you could be watching a consumer in a store shopping or eating food at Burger King. In a contrived observation, we bring respondents into a test lab or a test store where they're being observed in a very artificial environment, and that's contrived observation. Classification can be examined by mode of administration of how we're looking at it. So personal, audit, content, trace, mechanical, ethnography. So let's examine a few of these one by one. In personal observation, the researcher observes actual behavior as it occurs. Imagine researcher observing employees by pretending to be a shopper known as a mystery shopper. Here's some examples of of this thing. In one study, researchers were observing senior citizens buying dog treats at a grocery store to just learn more about, again, what is it that makes them want to buy dog treats, or what can we learn about the placement of dog treats on grocery store shelves by watching people shopping, right? Another researcher investigated poor sales of ties, so neckties at one of their stores. The researcher is, this is an example from the book Science of Shopping by Paco Underhill, where he found out, or they observed that that one particular store had poor sales of ties, and they learned the reason for it as being poor merchandising. Right, all previous analyses had yielded nothing because they found similar stores had, they took two similar stores, found out this particular store had particularly low sales, but the one with, similar demographics, similar location had good sales for ties. So they attributed the reason as being poor merchandising based on observation. To shed more light on this, the video cameras observing people shopping for ties observed or identified that people as examined ties would examine this tie rack, and they would have to, examine ties one by one, a tie tower. And as they would examine the ties, they would kind of bend down a little bit. And in doing so, they would end up inevitably being nudged by somebody walking right by them. It turns out the place where the tie tower was placed in the store was in a very narrow walkway. And as people examined the ties in the tie tower, they went down that little tie tower to examine ties lower down. Their rear end would stick out a little bit. And because the walkway was kind of narrow, they would get nudged. And so every time this happened, the video showed people would get a little disturbed. And eventually, if this happened 2 times or 3 times, they would give up and go on and look for something else in the store. So bottom line, the poor sales of ties were attributed to poor merchandising. Moving the tie tower solved the issue, and sales were back up again. Paco Underhill's book talks a lot about such interesting personal observation examples. There are other examples of qualitative observation methods also. One of them is an audit. An audit involves examining physical records or performing inventory analysis. Imagine examining items in a woman's purse or items in a car. Now, you must be wondering, well, how do you actually go about getting a woman to empty her purse in front of you? Granted, okay. So these are indeed really difficult kind of methods to implement. And so we don't see them use audit method, for example, being used much in practice. Personal observation is still utilized, albeit it is a bit pricey and expensive to have an individual tracking shoppers in a store watching them. Content analysis may involve examining sort of in a systematic fashion the content of communication. For example, you might go through a bunch of ads to learn more about what exactly are advertisers using in ads. Is it a certain kind of appeal or a certain kind of model, and so on. So doing this in a systematic manner is an example of content analysis. Trace analysis examines what is left behind after a person has moved on from the place. Very, again, old example of this is looking through what people were listening to in their cars when the car is brought in for service as a way to learn about what they're listening to on the radio. Not very common anymore, but that's one example of trace analysis. More modern way would be, again, looking at website cookies and weblog data to learn more about what people are doing online. Now, I really want to focus here mostly on mechanical observation. So personal observation in general can be tedious, time-consuming, and prone to human error and expensive. Paco Underhill's book, again, talks a lot about personal observation. Much of the insights that they learned and they describe in their book involves watching people as they navigate the aisles of Macy's or Bloomingdale's. Now, having a stalker, so to speak, of a researcher following a respondent through a store can be expensive. Even when we use videos, analyzing or going through hours and hours of video to identify how people respond to being nudged as they're examining ties, Paco called it the butt brush factor, can be, again, extremely expensive. So enter machines. With computers, systems, and machines in general, we can do observation in an automatic and a kind of more efficient and quick manner. And that's the big appeal of mechanical observation. I'm going to go through a few of the mechanical observation methods out here. Let's begin by looking at eye tracking monitors. Here's a great example. These are Tobii glasses. So the respondents you're looking at here are wearing Tobii glasses, which allow the researcher to learn about what the respondent is looking at using small cameras embedded in the glasses. What's more important is, as these people are shopping around in a store or going through a magazine, we can learn not only about what they're looking at, but how they're feeling at also. Because the Tobii glasses have cameras on the outside and the inside. The ones on the inside are focusing on the eye of the respondent to kind of learn about how they're reacting. We already know that based on how you feel about something, your eyes might get bigger or smaller. If something grabs your attention, your eyes becoming bigger, right? So bright lights, we know, of course, makes your eyes get smaller and bigger. So again, all these can be learned by watching people as they're kind of engaging in a certain behavior using cameras and these glasses. There are, of course, many other examples, right? So, and the oldest example, I guess, would be the scanners in supermarkets. Every time you go shopping, somebody barcode scans the items you buy, and that data goes into a large database, which allows the supermarket to know all about what you've been shopping for in the store. Turnstiles counting people going through. And so more recently, there's been a lot of excitement about the potential of learning about people from their expressions. So this TED video by a company called Affectiva talks more about how we're able to look at video of people and learn about how they're feeling at in the video. So are they happy? Are they sad? And all that's been done by literally looking at their expressions and learning about, are they shocked, happy, pleased, upset, and so on. So you can take a look at that video on TED, TED.com by Affectiva's CEO and founder. Or you can take a look at Google Vision. If you go to Google Vision, you can upload a photograph and it will tell you exactly what is the expression of the person in the photograph. So we kind of learn using here deep learning techniques to parse feelings of people using a photograph. There are, of course, other examples like in-store video tracking, location tracking, also examples of mechanical observation. Here's one example of mechanical observation by the respondents. It's a study by Raymond Burke, by the way, where they were doing a study to learn about, well, which of these displays are more effective. So what they did was they had this one experiment they're conducting where they had this one display, and they're trying to learn by seeing how long somebody stays in front of this display of whether it's effective or not. And their way of measuring how long somebody was in front of the display was based on how long the phone was linked to the free Wi-Fi service offered out there. We already know that whenever you're you're in a store that's free Wi-Fi, your phone jumps on the local free Wi-Fi. So, and most people have that kind of setup where the phone jumps onto free Wi-Fi automatically, saving bandwidth. So here, based on how long the phone is connected to Wi-Fi, the researchers were able to find out how long the respondent was standing in front of this particular display. So about 41% people spent 2 to 4 minutes on a display. And when they changed the display to this one here, they found out that number of 2 to 4 minutes went down to 26%. Right? So they found out then that most people were spending less time in front of the display with B than with A. But they also found out that more percent people, 80% actually stopped versus 12% with the previous display. So again, by using Wi-Fi data, they were able to learn about something pretty powerful about how long somebody was viewing a display. Okay. There's also examples of store video tracking the motion of people through stores to again learn what path do they take to traverse a store. Moving along, I'll talk to you a little bit about ethnography here. It's an interesting idea and concept. Ethnographers, they adapt their techniques from anthropology, and they believe that to understand a group of people, you must immerse yourself in their lives or embed yourself in their lives in the group study. So as an example, there is an anti-commerce group called the Burning Man Festival, or community called Burning Man Group. Now, the Burning Man Festival, it symbolizes many things. One of the many things that it kind of highlights is a group of people who want to get away from traditional ways of commerce. So there's no exchange of money anywhere in this Burning Man Festival that happens every year in Nevada. To better understand them, Bob Cousin, as an anthropologist, decided to learn more about them by embedding himself in that community. He became a part of them. He went to the Burning Man Festival. He spent 2 weeks in the middle of Nevada amongst people who were part of this festival, conversing with them, talking to them, making notes of his conversations, taking photographs when he was allowed to or permitted to take photographs of people, and so on, to again learn about them. He became part of them, right? And that's ethnographic research. Clearly, this requires a lot of, again, time and effort, and is open to interpretation bias, but it offers some very rich insights, far more rich than a survey could ever offer. Okay. So to kind of wrap it up then, a lot of exploratory research methods tend to be qualitative. We've already seen this. They tend to have small sample sizes that are too small to conduct inferential statistics. The results tend to be interpreted in context or holistically. And there is a huge, chance of researcher bias with this sort of research. That being said, we are coming up with ways of quantifying qualitative data, converting the words and opinions and issues and video into numbers. To give you one example, with text, we can quite easily take a bunch of words and convert them into, we can summarize data based on, word association tasks. We examine things like average response time or frequency in which words are expressed. Text analysis involves coding interviews into text, or conducting sentiment analysis with text, or extracting from text underlying themes. You can literally take a bunch of words in text, break them into individual words, and group them using a topic model, for example, to understand if there's a theme that underscores the data being discussed. To give you one example, a hard example of sentiment analysis, I'm going to share with you an illustration with tweets. So what I did here was I pulled some tweets. I'm not sure with that in just a minute. My screen is subtle here. Here's an example of some tweets I pulled of Elon Musk. So a bit more about this. This is a in our NIT file, there's a software called R that can be used to analyze data. Here I'm using a certain package in R to connect to Twitter and gather data that has the keyword Elon Musk in it. And I'm looking for 5,000 tweets by including the word or the keyword phrase Elon Musk by connecting to Twitter's API. Okay. So here's what I found out then. I found out that a certain user ID person out here, this status ID, on this date, said the following. And pardon me here, the information out here is not censored, so my bad. If there's anything offensive, my apologies in advance. This is what came up from Twitter. So here it goes. I'll read this one out here. I don't know why people think Tesla's PR team would be taken at their word. Elon Musk, same thing I did. Predator, and so on. People are talking here about something Elon Musk was called on in the media about, okay, at the time of this video. So here are a couple of the tweets. So what we can do now with tweets are basically a bunch of words like you're seeing out here. Okay. Look for more, if you can get some more here. Okay, so these are a bunch of words like this one says, Tesla used to charge by the minute once Tesla entered the Texas grid, so on and so forth. These are a bunch of words. Now, what we can try and do here is quantify these words. So one way of accomplishing that is to tokenize the words. So if you recall, the first tweet we saw had words in a paragraph. So we can always break that into what are called tokens or one-word tokens here, or 1 gram tokens, like Elon Musk, what you need and want are people who are. So what has been done here is this is all by the same person, because I've taken the tweet and tokenized that, and the words are right now in one column in a sense. Okay, and so on. These are of course all by Stephen because it's the same tweet, but it's right now the orientation of the tweet is now as a column rather than as a long sentence. And then we kind of decided to categorize these words in the tweet as being positive and negative. So a word like abolish is negative, abominable is negative, and so on. Abort is negative. Somebody has created this classification we can use, like accessible, misspelled, is positive, accidental is negative, and so on. So we're going to use these keywords then, these terms that have been pre-coded as being positive or negative, apply them to our corpus of tweets, and then understand again whether they're overall positive or negative. So what we find out is that the tweets that I pulled have 4,781 negative words and 2,005 positive. So it's mostly negative words. We can see then that again there's an overwhelming number of negative keywords there, more negative keywords than positive keywords. This chart doesn't seem right to me. I'm sorry, my bad. Excuse me. Let me backtrack a second here. These negative and positive is the number of keywords that are positive and negative in the Bing lexicon. The lexicon I'm using for classifying keywords or terms being positive or negative, that has 4,781 negative words and 2,005 positive words. What we can now go to is map the terms or tokens in the tweets to these the lexicon of keywords to figure out how many positive and how many negative there are. We find out in our tweets, in Elon Musk tweets, there are mostly positive terms and not as many negative terms. Another way of quantifying this is to assign a number. So a word that is slightly negative would be a -1, very negative is -2, and so on. We're not just seeing the word as being positive, negative, but there are increasing levels of negativity or positivity, which is figured out by this APEN lexicon. Using this lexicon, we're able to then, in the same manner as before, able to come up with a valuation for every tweet. As overall, the tweet has a lot of negative words, just negative, a lot of positive words, it's overall positive. So like this tweet here, all on the right has probably a lot of positive words, and that's why it, those tweets have high value. So it's a histogram of showing you tweets by negativity or positivity. And our sentiment score here comes out to be overall, 0.19, telling us overall people are slightly positive in tweets regarding Elon Musk. We can also learn about emotions in these tweets as follows. So we can see out here that the tweets have emotions like trust, anticipation, fear more so than joy, but more anticipation and trust than fear. And lastly, here's a word cloud showing you, giving you a sense of the words that are positive and negative. And oddly enough, you can find the word Trump in here, which is bizarre, but okay. Okay. That's an example then of how you can quantify qualitative data. So to wrap up then, we have reviewed in this session, in the prior one, research designs, 3 major types: exploratory, descriptive, and causal. We went in depth into exploratory research, examining different kinds of exploratory research, both disguised and undisguised. And lastly, examined how one can make qualitative data quantitative to lend itself to traditional analysis. Thank you.